I want to welcome everybody back to the FITSNews studio for our fourth edition of the Week in Review. I'm rocking my 1967 University of South Carolina baseball jersey. We'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the feedback section of this presentation. But for right now, I want to walk you through what we're covering. We've got a big week in South Carolina news and politics this week. We've got the potential for delayed elections, which is a big deal. We've got an update on judges. Shocker. There's problems with judges in South Carolina. Who would have figured? We've got an update on some judges related to the Murdoch murders saga, the big story that's drawn national and international interest here on South Carolina, an update on them. We've also got an interesting update on the Murdoch case from Liz Farrell, our executive editor, a story that she published this week. Additionally, we want to give our readers the very latest news on the medical marijuana debate at the South Carolina State House. There's a big compromise on that issue. We've got an update on the tax debate in South Carolina. And last but not least, the congressional catfight that I predicted on this program last week is one step closer to reality. All that and more heading your way on the FITSNews Week in Review. All right, so this is a big story that no one's talking about, and that's the date of the partisan primary elections here in South Carolina. Now, in most years, the process begins in March when candidates file for elected office as either Republicans or Democrats. And then in June, usually the first or second Tuesday in June, the parties will hold the first round of voting for the nomination of the Republican or the Democratic Party. Now, in South Carolina, this matters a great deal because with Republicans dominating all of the statewide offices, most of the congressional districts, and the vast majority of seats in both the South Carolina House and Senate, the Republican primary is where it's at. The winner of that election typically goes on to win in November because, again, South Carolina is such an ostensibly Republican state. Now, this year's a bit different because this year is the decennial process of redistricting. And when I say decennial, for those of you who are educated in a government-run school in South Carolina, that means every 10 years. Every 10 years, the United States Census recounts how many people there are. And not only how many people there are, but where they are. And based on that information, Republicans and Democrats in Columbia get together and they redraw the state's political boundaries. This is your district where you vote for your House member, for your state senator, for your congressional representative, okay? So these lines get redrawn every 10 years, and it's always very political because lawmakers are supposed to redraw these districts based on legitimate population growth, migration, and they're supposed to draw these lines in a way that communities stay together so that there's cohesion and that lawmakers are electing constituencies, common constituencies. That's not really how it works, though. How it works is that lawmakers draw these lines based on backroom deals to protect incumbents and to protect partisan advantages. And again, the Democrats are a big part of this. I've seen a lot of stories in the mainstream media over the last few weeks talking about Republicans gerrymandering or redrawing districts in a corrupt way. But the fact is that they're doing it in cooperation with Democratic leaders. And in fact, the leader of that effort in years past has been U.S. Majority Whip Jim Clyburn, one of the most powerful men in Washington, D.C. Now, Congressman Clyburn represents a majority-minority district, and that means a district where the majority of the population is African-American, black. In this district, Clyburn has represented since 1993. And over the years, through multiple redistricting processes, he has made sure it stayed that way. Because again, he doesn't want to lose power, doesn't want to lose his seat. So again, when you read in the mainstream press that this is all racist and that this is all Republicans, that's only half true, okay? Democrats are part of this process too. But why does this matter? Why does this matter as it relates to the upcoming election calendar? I'll tell you. Because of the delay in the U.S. Census data this year due to COVID and other factors, the federal government was late in getting numbers to lawmakers to redraw these lines. So lawmakers in turn were then late in producing their maps, which means that the people who get pissed off about the maps and sue the lawmakers were late in filing their lawsuits. Bottom line, everybody's late. So, and in some cases that's probably a good thing, but in this case it's not because we've got elections to run. And in June, we're supposed to go to the polls and decide which Republicans and which Democrats we want to appear on the ballot in November. From what I'm told, that's not going to happen this year. From what I'm told, we're looking at least a 1 and possibly a 2-month delay on these partisan primary elections, which would mean that voters would not go to the polls to pick their nominees until perhaps as late as August. Now, does this matter? Yes, it compresses the general election cycle, which means that voters will have less time to decide which one of the major party nominees they want to pick from, or hopefully, my God, hopefully this will be the year we get some third-party options, because this two-party thing hadn't really been working out that well for either the country or the state. But the compression of this time frame is very important, and we're going to be keeping a very close eye on this moving forward, because again, as this lawsuit is adjudicated in the federal system, that's going to have a direct impact on when you cast your ballot this spring. It's going to have a direct impact on when these candidates start bombarding you with their mail pieces, their television ads, and it's also going to have a direct impact on the competitiveness of these races moving forward. Now, 2022 is expected to be a landslide year for Republicans. The GOP is projected to storm in South Carolina, much like it did in 2020, possibly expanding its majorities in the South Carolina House and in the statewide offices, which currently they hold all of them. So Republicans expected to do very well this fall, but again, how well they do could hinge on that primary date. And again, the competitiveness for that primary election is going to be critical in determining who the Republican nominees are, because once again, in South Carolina, it's the Republican primary election that eventually decides, in most cases, who your elected representative is. So another week, another scandal involving South Carolina judges. And the scandal this week wasn't so much what the judges did, it was what the people who were in charge of appointing them failed to do. And I'm talking about the South Carolina General Assembly, both House members and senators, who gathered this week to vote on a slate of judges. Now, I reported on this earlier this week and asked readers to guess how many of these races did lawmakers have a chance to pick a new judge? How many of these races were contested? In other words, how many opportunities did lawmakers have to throw out judges who consistently let violent criminals go free? And the answer to that question was 0. 0. There were no contested races. So you start thinking, okay, who's to blame for that? Well, lawmakers, because they're the ones who screen the judges. They're the ones who clear them for nomination. And then again, they're the ones who ultimately vote on them. So the lack of choice, the lack of options that they had, is totally their fault. And again, as I said earlier this week, where there is no choice, there is no accountability. Where there are no options, no one is held responsible. It's the same thing over and over again. And as I've pointed out for years now, the consequences here are deadly. We're talking about material impact on public safety, materially deleterious impact on public safety. Now, one of the judges that I talked about this week in our coverage is a guy named Daniel Hall up in York County. This is a circuit court judge, ran for re-election this year, had a very qualified opponent who wanted to run against him, who was eminently qualified. In fact, lawmakers had found her qualified to be a lower level judge earlier this year. They refused to screen her out in this case. They refused to put her name in nomination for this judgeship because they knew she was going to beat this judge. So they found her unqualified. Unqualified. Unbelievable. Now, Judge Hall gets in there. He's the only name on the ballot. I want to tell you a little bit about this guy. This is a guy who within the last 5 years, he has given probation to a pregnant woman who had a baby and then killed it, buried it in her backyard. Gave probation to a peeping Tom, who victims and prosecutors said should have been in jail. Gave probation to a woman who mowed down an 11-year-old boy in a fatal hit and run. The kid pushed his little sister out of the way of this oncoming car. Woman just drove off. Gave her probation too. Most egregiously though, Hall takes a guy who's been accused of criminal domestic violence of a high and aggravated nature. This is the highest level of domestic violence on the books, a felony. A guy who has not once but twice defied judges' orders to stay away from his alleged victim. Judge Hall lets this guy go free. And within 3 months, kills not only his wife, his 5-year-old son, and then turns the gun on himself. This is the guy that lawmakers reelected. And we've got the vote, we got the roll call on that here, and I'm going to put it up. And we're going to take a look at it right now. And, I got some friends on there who voted the wrong way. And I'm not going to hide that. Very disappointed in those guys. Senator Tom Davis, he's in here just the other day on medical marijuana. He's a good friend of mine. He inexplicably voted to give this guy another term on the bench. Again, totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. Judges in South Carolina have one job, people, and that is to protect public safety. It is to uphold justice, uphold the interests of public safety, and they are failing miserably on that score, miserably. And it is not just one judge, it's an epidemic. It's an epidemic, and I've been covering it for years, and again, waiting on lawmakers to take office that will, for once, start holding these judges accountable. Now, in addition to judges who aren't doing their job, we got corrupt judges. And that was a big focus of our coverage again this week. And I'm referring to judges down in the 14th Judicial Circuit, which is, again, the home of the Murdoch family. Folks have been following this story very closely. The Murdoch murder saga, multiple investigations into 53-year-old Alec Murdoch. He's a disgraced attorney from Hampton, South Carolina. He's the scion of a very powerful family down there, the Murdoch family. 3 of his relatives have been solicitor down there, district attorney, if you will, and also one of the partners in a very prestigious, or formerly prestigious law firm down there, which handled a lot of these cases. Now, there's 2 judges down in Hampton County in the 14th Circuit that this news outlet has been focused on. One of them is Judge Carmen Mullen. Now, a lot of readers are familiar with her because she was the presiding judge in a public corruption investigation in Columbia about 4 years ago. This was the Probegate investigation involving allegations of pay-to-play politics at the State House. Now, Judge Mullen did not acquit herself particularly well in that case. She showed a lot of favoritism to the defendants, showed a lot of favoritism to the corrupt politicians. And so I criticized her often during that process, but she is once again under the microscope as it relates to her proximity to the Murdoch family. And specifically, she's under fire for some questionable settlements that have resulted in criminal charges against Alec Murdoch, particularly for approving these settlements and in one case, allegedly failing to enter the documents into the public record. Just a huge violation of the basic tenets of justice. She's one of the judges that's under the microscope. There's another judge down there, Perry Buckner. I've talked to attorneys who've had cases before Buckner tell me he actually sold his law firm to the Murdochs prior to taking a seat on the bench, and of course delivered favorable ruling after favorable ruling to the Murdochs. Now, again, in the financial scams that this news outlet has been following, and in a lot of cases has exclusively uncovered thanks to the diligent work of Mandy Matney, our news director. Just cannot credit her enough for the investigative reporting she's done to uncover a lot of these scams. But for these scams to take place, it involves 3 different factors. Obviously, you got to have the lawyers who are involved, who draw up the paperwork, who tell the clients, well, you got this much in the settlement when really they should have gotten a lot more. But you got the lawyers, you got the bankers. Somebody's got to sign the checks, right? But then the third leg of that is the judges. And that's one that a lot of people haven't been focused on. And so I wrote a big column this week drawing attention back to the fact that, hey, it's not just the Murdochs and their attorneys and their cronies. It's not just the bankers, who, by the way, we're told that this is going to be the month we're going to see some indictments related to that side of this equation. But it's also the judges. The judges had to play a part of this. So again, stay tuned for much more on that. But in the meantime, I wanted to cut real quickly to our executive editor, Liz Farrell. She broke some interesting Murdoch news this week regarding an incident that took place back in 1993 involving Alec Murdoch. Let's cut to Liz.
Hi, guys. So this week I wrote about Alec Murdoch's run-in with the law back in 1993. And in reporting this case, we had heard a lot from people who were telling us that he had had these types of run-ins, like bar fights and drunk driving incidents and that kind of thing. And it resulted in no legal action. So whereas a normal person probably would be arrested in some of these cases, not only was Alec not arrested, there's very little paperwork out there that we've been able to find over the years. So one of these reports came from the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office, and What I wrote about was a brawl that he had started allegedly at a strip club, and there were 3 men charged in it, and he was one of them. And he was charged with public disorderly conduct. And I think the thing that's really shocked people is that instead of being taken to jail, as one of the 3 gentlemen was taken to jail, he was driven home by the deputy. So this deputy, it's sort of hard to believe, but it's an hour and 20 minutes from Hilton Head to where Alec was living at the time. So this deputy, instead of taking him up to the Beaufort County Detention Center, took him home. And then a month later, the charges were dismissed. So the 2 other guys, one of them was injured in the fight, and he was taken to the hospital, or he was supposed to meet the deputy at the hospital rather. And then the other guy was taken to jail. So basically the interest in this is, we're not trying to dig up, obviously, things that happen to people during their 20s. I would say a good number of us probably have things that, are no longer relevant to us now in our careers and at our age. But, this just goes to show another facet where there's sort of special treatment. It's an example of what people mean when they say that about the Murdoch family, that they just not only were the law, but the law was very favorable to them. Again, this just shows you the special treatment and the fact that there's 2 different justice systems, one for those with influence and then one for the rest of us.
I want to thank Liz. That was obviously one of our most highly trafficked stories this week, and it generated a ton of response from readers. I had multiple people email and text messaging, DM and Facebook messaging me, wanting to know who the other folks involved in that strip club bar brawl were. Now, I'm going to leave that to Liz. If you want more info on the story, Liz@FITSNews.com. Liz Farrell is your go-to on that one. But again, what a very interesting story that delves sort of into the roots of this privilege that the Murdochs have enjoyed down there in the 14th Circuit. Now, another big story this week that we've been following very closely. In fact, last week we had a lot of movement on this issue, and it's the debate over medical marijuana in South Carolina. Now, this is something that I've covered for a long time. In fact, I've covered the debate over not just medical, but recreational marijuana use. For a long time, my news outlet has editorialized in favor of legalizing both. Again, not just as a liberty issue, but as an economic issue. I think it would benefit the state in terms of its bottom line. Just makes good common sense. Also, it gets the criminal element out of the marijuana business, which again, currently, that's one of the big problems with violence in our state, and the violence linked to drugs and drug trafficking is that we've criminalized everything. It's sort of like what happened during Prohibition back in the gangsters of the early 20th century. So again, that's one of my reasons for supporting the legalization of marijuana, both medically and recreationally. Now, South Carolina is obviously taking baby steps in that direction. In fact, we had Senator Tom Davis, the lead sponsor of that bill, in the studio last week, and he told us that the bill that he's pushing only has 12 qualifying conditions for people being able to medically toke up, while a bill that was passed in Mississippi earlier this year had more than 24 qualifying conditions. So it's a very narrowly drawn bill here in South Carolina. And this week it was drawn even more narrowly. Senator Davis is working with one of his colleagues in the state Senate, Josh Kimbrell, a social conservative from Spartanburg, South Carolina. And I spoke with Kimbrell this week, and he told me that, yes, he and Senator Davis were working on a compromise amendment regarding how medical marijuana would be distributed in South Carolina under the new law. Now, currently there's a dispensary network which would dispense the pot. This has been criticized by law enforcement. They believe that this is setting up a structure that could very easily, to borrow the phrase of one advocate, flip a switch and create a recreational marijuana structure, distribution network, if you will. Now, Senator Davis is hoping to pass a bill that, again, avoids that sort of specter, and he has proposed with Senator Kimbrell an amendment that would allow pharmacists, and particularly the state's pharmacy board, to oversee the distribution of marijuana through this network of dispensaries. Now, do I support that? Again, I think the whole thing, from my perspective as a libertarian, it seems a little bit too restrictive, a little bit too government heavy, a little bit too diktat. top down. But again, I understand what Senator Davis is trying to do. He's a firm believer that politics is the art of the possible. In fact, he said that on our show last week. And so he's trying his very best to get a bill through, just like in 2014, he pushed to get a CBD bill through, which was South Carolina's first step toward, again, the decriminalization of cannabis for medical use. Obviously, this debate's still very much in process, very much in flux. I'm told by multiple senators that the vote count is very close. And I'm also told that there's some concern amongst these lawmakers about the nature of this debate, and particularly Senator Sandy Senn, Senator Greg Hembry, and Senator Billy Garrett. These are three lawmakers who I'm told have not been conducting themselves particularly well during this debate. And I'm going to be focused on those three senators a bit more in the coming week as this debate moves forward, because again, this is an important issue. We need to debate it fairly. We don't need to demonize those who disagree with us. And I'm going to have some words for those three senators coming up next week. Now, one of the other big issues on the plate of the South Carolina General Assembly this week, taxes. And I'm talking about plans by South Carolina Senate Finance Committee Chairman Harvey Peeler, one of the most powerful men in state government, to reform the state's tax code. Now, Peeler has yet to release his proposal, so we don't know what it includes. Also, we don't know what the Democratic proposal is. I communicated earlier today with Representative Spencer Wetmore. She was the Democrat who gave the response to Governor Henry McMaster's State of the State address last month. Wetmore has told me that she's still working with her colleagues on crafting the Democratic tax plan. So there's a lot of discussion right now, a lot of talking about what they might do, what Democrats might do, and what Republicans might do. But here's the bottom line, folks. We've got last year a $32.1 billion budget. We've got another $5.73 billion coming into the kitty this year. So far, only one politician has said to give any of it back, and frankly, it was pathetic what he proposed. Governor Henry McMaster has proposed a $177 million tax cut, which, again, nothing. In fact, for every new dollar coming into Columbia this year, the governor would send 3 cents back to you, the taxpayer. Again, and we wonder why South Carolina's not competitive. You got North Carolina getting ready to pump $13.5 billion into its economy in tax relief after cutting taxes significantly already over the last decade. And what are we doing? Spending 97 cents of every new dollar that's coming in. Unacceptable. Now, what will Peeler do? Will he produce a tax cut that's more robust? I certainly hope so. But again, if you want to check out our story on Senator Peeler's impending proposal, it's on FITSNews.com. Of interest, that story begins with a pretty lengthy story that involves one of my encounters with Senator Peeler back in 2003. I almost got my ass kicked, basically. So if you want to read about me almost getting my ass kicked, check that story out, because I had a nice little anecdote at the beginning of it that involved my first meeting with Senator Harvey Peeler. So check that out. But again, more importantly, we'll keep an eye on the issue of the tax reform debate as it continues to advance at the South Carolina State House. All right, so I get a lot of grief sometimes from other media outlets. They like to call me a blog. They like to, copy and paste what I write and then not cite me. That's fine. I ain't gonna worry about that so much anymore. Proof is in the pudding, people. Proof is when your sources get it right. And I've got a great network of sources. They know me, they trust me. They know I'll go to jail before I rat them out, so they give me information. And this week, we exclusively reported on a major development in one of the 2 contested Republican congressional races in South Carolina. I'm talking about the 7th District, which is where incumbent Tom Rice, who's been up there for 8 years already, Tom Rice voted to impeach Donald Trump last January. And again, I haven't really criticized him on that. I wasn't there. I can't really say in that moment what I would have done, but Tom Rice voted to impeach Trump in a district that Trump won by nearly 60% of the vote. That's the general election, right? Not the Republican primary. That's the general election. So Tom Rice obviously facing some significant opposition. And this week, Trump came out and endorsed one of his opponents. And he endorsed State Representative Russell Fry, who's a majority whip. That means a guy who rallies votes in the South Carolina House of Representatives. Russell Fry, one of several announced challengers to Tom Rice, is now the challenger of choice for President Donald Trump. Now, that was first reported on our news outlet and came to pass about 2 hours after we reported on it, as a matter of fact. Now, there's another contested congressional race in South Carolina, and we touched on this during our last week in review. Now this one's going to be really exciting because this one involves two politicians who just don't like each other at all. At all. And I'm talking about current Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who's a former state representative, and Katie Arrington, who's a former state representative, served with Nancy Mace at the State House, who went on to a decorated career at the U.S. Department of Defense under the Trump administration. Now, Arrington ran for Congress back in 2018, and she was narrowly defeated by Democrat Joe Cunningham, who is now running for governor of South Carolina, sort of. Hasn't raised much money or really done anything of note, but he's running. So Arrington announced this week that she's considering campaigning against Mace. And we are told that Trump will be endorsing her in the event she decides to run, which would be a major development down there in the 1st Congressional District. Because again, Nancy Mace, in the aftermath of the January 6th rioting at the U.S. Capitol, she was very critical of Donald Trump, basically said that his legacy had been wiped out in the aftermath of those riots. And so Trump, not a fan of hers, and in fact, last November, called on a challenger to come out against her, to run against her in the 1st Congressional District. So again, it'll be very interesting to see if Katie Arrington has indeed answered that call. Our sources say that she has. And after that, it'll be very interesting to see whether the president, former President Trump, endorses her in that campaign against Nancy Mace. But two major congressional races in South Carolina that Donald Trump, one he's already involved in, one we're hearing he's going to get involved in, and this matters. This matters because, again, Trump may run for president again in 2024. And if he does that, he's got to come through South Carolina, which holds the first in the South presidential primary. And so how well Trump's candidates perform in the 2022 election could have a significant impact on how well Trump himself performs when he comes before South Carolina voters in 3 years, again, if he runs. So let's keep an eye on those races. Count on FITSNews for the very latest political news, and more on that in a moment. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in this week to the Week in Review. We're having fun with this format. I think we're getting good at it, but I don't know. We'll see. Certainly your feedback is going to be critical in that process. And in fact, I want to stop here. I want to give a little bit of feedback. I actually got some feedback on the show from my mother. That's right. My mom sent me a text message this week. And again, my mom's ability to text is hit or miss. But here's what she said. And I'm going to do my mom voice here, right? Son, just watch some of your interviews. You do quite well and look good too. I think she's a little biased there. More professional without the baseball cap though. All right, sorry. Thanks, Mom. Also, my daughter weighed in, was watching one of the clips and said that Dylan Nolan, our director of special projects back there, needs to use more light. I don't know. We're working on it. Anyway, it's a work in progress, and we're having fun with it. And every week, I think we're getting a little bit better with it. And so I want to thank Dylan for the work he's done, not just on this show, but also with all the video offerings that we're producing here at FITSNews.com, whether it's the breaking news videos that we do, whether it's the context videos we provide to give our readers a little bit more information about the stories that we're covering. Just great work by Dylan Nolan, our Director of Special Projects. And again, if you want to support what we're doing on the video front, please reach out to Andrea Holloway. Andrea is our Director of Advertising and Marketing. You can email her right here, Andrea@FITSNews. There you go. She will hook you up with all the information you might need. But again, to all of our readers, to all of our subscribers, to all of our viewers, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for helping us make this possible. And we look forward to providing you with additional information on the breaking political news in South Carolina next week. So tune into the Week in Review next time. Thank you.